Many years ago in the sweltering summer of '76, I was living in North Hollywood. Money was scarce, so I was squatting in an abandoned block of apartments. The bottom had fallen out of the real estate market, rents were high, and there had been a lot of foreclosures in the area. My story begins with the events that occurred over one night in July. My name is Carrie Evelyn Anderson, and this is my story written from notes and diary entries taken from the fateful night. The terror that was inflicted on me will never leave. My mind is now a troubled one, for which there is seldom relief. Do not judge me. I'm not deranged. I just need help to get me through the night every once in a while. Is that so bad? The dive I was in was at the top of a high-rise. You could see the huge letters of the famous Hollywood sign from my window. If you turned your head a little more, you could also see the Griffith Observatory. For those under a shell, that's where the observatory scenes were shot in James Dean's Rebel Without a Cause. As it drew dusk, the horizon was ripped apart by an orange crushed sky. The ragged mountains cut the skyline from end to end. With thin lips pursed, I stood in wonder at the magnificent views over the City of Angels. Of course, there's another reason why I lived in a squat, but I never tell people about that. Some years before, when my brother was still around, we were driving out on Ortega Highway 74. It was supposed to be a weekend away with a group of friends. My brother Ethan owned a Shelby, and it was his pride and joy. We were just cruising the winding roads, playing it cool, heading to Lake Elsinore. My friend's father had an old wooden cabin there. A freak rainstorm came upon us. Ethan turned on the brights. Something ran out into the road and stopped dead. It turned its body in my direction and looked at me, growling. The car skidded sideways, tires screeching in an attempt to avoid the creature. We zigzagged and swerved before the car flipped into a verge on the edge of the woods. It was then I saw the thing properly. It wasn't so big, 3 foot tall or so. It had 2 small arms with 3 clawed fingers, and stood on 2 almost reptilian hind legs. Slowly, it moved towards us. Lurching and lunging, it made the weirdest sounds, loud. Brah! Then there was a god-awful cry as it limped into the upturned Shelby. The last thing I felt was the hot liquid breath, the warm slither before it savaged Ethan, shaking its head side to side like a rabid dog as it ripped his flesh apart. It came around to my side of the car. Maybe it had its fill. All it did was brush past me. Its coarse hair was like bristles. I peeked at it as it went by. It stopped, looked, and chomped its elongated jaws before climbing on the underside of the car and crying out into the night. I don't know how long it was, but it seemed a while or more. I put my hand on my ear, cupping it to listen for any sounds of the creature. Nothing. Dead silence except for the owl hooting, so I thought I'd chance a peek. I gripped the underside of the car, snagging my nails. As I eased my way out of the wreck, I mournfully looked over at Ethan. A somber mood had come over me, but one thing was clear: I was in a real mess. I checked his pulse, beamed, and punched the humid night's air. I spoke softly. "Can you walk, Ethan?" He was still in shock and said nothing. His wounds were bad, mostly flesh wounds, but he was scarred for life. His face marred, but he would live. A full moon glowed, and I slugged him over my shoulders and followed the yellow lines in the middle of the road. Ethan was too heavy for me, and I was only a slip of a girl and had to stop every once in a while. I spoke to Ethan, not expecting a reply, but it was there to comfort me. I think it was a chupacabra. Ethan raised his drooped head to look me in the eye, smiled, and dropped his head again. Sympathetically, I said, "Look, I'm telling you, man, swear down it was." Up yonder was the Ortega Oaks candy store. Although it was closed, we could pitch up in the porch. The best thing I could do was to make a call to a friend to come and fetch us back to Los Angeles. In the coming weeks, Ethan was never the same. He began to become more aggressive towards me. I still loved him, though. Every day he got worse, his health deteriorating at an alarming rate. His wounds, however, healed, for the most part. It seemed to me a mental thing. I tried to get him to leave the apartment, but he refused and would not leave the room. He stayed in that one squalid place all day, cowering in the corner, afraid of his own shadow. He was a wreck, a shell of who he once was. He'd twitch and fidget and shunter. You know, he actually sounded more like an animal than a man now. I was at my wit's end. What should I do? I had troubles of my own. In the later days, I had started using morphine to ease life's burdens. I was going crazy, and it all had to come to a head. In the next week or so, I began to get all his basic requirements sorted. What I mean is, I had a plan. It was diabolical, thinking back now. I don't know what possessed me. I scorched the apartment block for what I needed, finding an old manky mattress and buckets in the squat below. I crept into his room while he was asleep. I say he. Nowadays, an it is what Ethan had become. I soft shoe shuffled to where he slept. His lair, I now call it. I tethered him with a chain, like an animal. He snorted and stirred. His hairy eyelids opened. I saw its blood vessels pulse. And then the creature rolled the white of its eyes and fell back into slumber. Now my work began. In earnest, it would be the longest night I had ever had or want to. Well, at least that's what I thought at the time. I began boarding the door up with timber. I smashed floorboards, furniture, pallets, and old wooden crates down. I nailed the animal Ethan into his lair. He was no human anymore. I would endeavor to keep the creature fed or watered until it died or withered away. Then I would forget the memory of him forever. So, the thing I now believed to be turning into a chupacabra was nailed firmly behind the wall. It was tethered and seemed to awake solely at night. Things went on like that for years. I'd get shopping trolleys left by the local youths. They'd pick them up at Safeways and dump them at the abandoned apartments. For what I needed, they were perfect. I'd scavenge every evening before sunset for roadkill, strays, and drunken vagrants. Roadkill was best. Strays and vagabonds became a messy affair. In time, I could proficiently gut any creature you care to put a name on. Just down the corridor from where I slept, there was a room that if you approach, you would feign the stench of vile. The old chipboard door was rotting. I gave it a lick of paint and cut strips of polythene as a bit of segregation. PVC sheets were put down on the floor. It helped clean the mess up after the butchering. The place was swarmed with flies buzzing around. They'd settle on the meat, feed, and lay eggs. When I'd carve up the bodies, I would put the meat into buckets and feed the creature. In the door, I had devised a shutter. I never went in unless I had to. What I would do is hammer the meat with the back of a cooking utensil, soften it up a bit and get it nice and bloody. It seemed to perk the animal's attention. Its nose twitched searchingly. The smell of fresh blood drove the humanoid crazy. It disgusted me what had become of him and myself, if only the chupacabra had not bitten him that night. One evening I watched it feed on a vagabond's cadaver. I noticed it sucked blood from the strewn body till it drained it dry. Then it ripped him apart in such a manic frenzy that I retched. The wild red eyes caught mine, and then the blood-curdling death scream. I'm not ashamed to say that it chilled me to the bone. I decided I had to kill this thing. My recollection was to say my farewells the next evening after feeding. Then I would blow its brains out, take it out of its misery, and end both of our suffering. That day I went to the library. I had read about chupacabra some more. The book said that it fed in vampiric ways. It drains creatures of its blood. Over the years, many animals have been found, usually goats, cattle, and livestock. On the carcasses, there was always puncture wounds on the neck, reminiscent of Dracula. Apparently, chupacabra means goatsucker in the Spanish tongue. The creature can be found throughout the Americas. To my cost, I realized that it was my land too. My name is Carrie Evelyn Anderson, and I swore that day that I would kill the cursed thing. The choice of weapon for a non-export, I believe, is a shotgun. I don't want to miss if I panic. Recoil, that is the problem. These damn things don't have kick, Ethan used to say. He was a Vietnam vet in another life. The quickest way to get my hands on a gun would be to use the guys who hang out on the corner from where I lived. They dabbled in guns and the like, and would do it all no questions asked. I had only $100 to my name, and I figured that would do it. Later that day, on the block next to mine near Safeway, there was a group of fellows who looked pretty likely to be in the game for what I was buying. I got them down to $80 and some ammo, enough for what I needed. In anticipation, I started to tremble. I was so anxious. Best have a stiff drink to calm my nerves. I went to the room I used to butcher things to get some fresh cuts of meat. I remember slicing a vagrant's arm, of no remorse. It was a means to an end. I slung the fleshy pieces into a bucket and I put tougher pieces on a tray. I always served them separately. The creature was getting restless. I heard the clinking of chains and the constant shuntering and the shuffling feet pacing back and forth. I spied through the people. It had grown in recent weeks. The thing was 4 feet tall at least. It marched unsteadily on its powerful-looking reptilian legs. Doubts crossed my mind. Was I doing the right thing? And then I looked once more. It had to be done. The creature whined and walked over to me. It scratched at the wall with its 3-fingered claws. Did these things have a sixth sense, I wonder? Surely not. Time for stepping up now. I went down to the hallway to my room to get the shotgun and cartridges, and that's when all hell broke loose. The thing kept running at the door, headbutting and kicking wildly. It was insane. Over and over it smashed at the door. I managed to get 2 shots off, but the recoil felled me like a tree. Before I could reload, the creature had burst through the wooden planks that had held it for so long. It bounded and leapt down the corridor until I could see it no longer. The only traces of it were the clinking of chains that trailed after it. The creature had ripped the tether plain out of the concrete mounding, and it had gotten its freedom. But that's not the end. A week later, I was writing. I had decided I needed work to get my life straight. The nighttime that's the worst is when the moon is just a quarter and its light is dimming. That's when my mind is the most fertile and my thoughts go awry. I find myself thinking, where is it now? What is it doing? Every coyote that cries makes my hair stand up on the back of my neck. It seems this is my curse, and it'll haunt me for my sins forever. Dear Diary, this is my final night's entry. I'm not living in that abandoned block anymore, they're for demolishment. It's a lovely evening tonight. I had a drink, relaxed, and did some work. Nothing to report here. The only place I can find solace these days is in the clutches of morphine. That's my peace. But I'd become a slave to it. This night I will put it all to an end, and damn the world. And this is when the terror frequented my soul. Outside I heard the trash cans being kicked around. I pulled down the Venetian blinds to have a look, but I couldn't see anything. I went to get a coffee. I heard the noise again. It wasn't unusual, dogs in this area were always scavenging. A muffled yelp, followed by a pinning sound very distressing, so I checked again. There was nothing to be seen, so I went back to doing my final entries in my diary for the night. It was when I heard the clawing on the downstairs hallway carpet. This was really boring me now, so I dunked a few chocolate chip cookies into my drink and kept writing. Over the next 15 minutes, it was really quiet. I began relaxing again. Then, in the corner of my eye, I saw the door move. Then it was nudged a little bit more. It's just a draft, I told myself. I was finishing up doing the entries when I felt hot breath on my neck. I dare not turn around. The stench was vile, and I would recognize it anywhere. I felt a rough tongue on my neck, and the hot slither dripped down over my shoulder. When I heard the weird, loud clicking noises. I knew the chupacabra had come for me. I fell off my chair the second time it made the hellish squawk. It quickly pinned me down with its powerful legs, its 3-pronged toes digging into my flesh mercilessly. The creature bowed its oval head, opening its elongated jaws, made that blood-curdling scream, and ripped into my throat. All the commotion was my saving, as a neighbor burst in like hell's fury, letting off rounds left, right, and center. The creature broke out through the window, leaving tracks of blood, and it was never seen again. I woke up in the hospital. Apparently I'm doing well now, but it's been a long haul. The only thing the doctors don't understand is why my body hair is thicker. The specialist had put it down to a side effect of the medication I was on, but I know better, and so do you after hearing this. One day perhaps that bump in the other room is not quite what it seems, and maybe you catch something out of the corner of your eye that shouldn't be there. Some contorted creature, a tormented soul. Are they coming for you tonight?